Germany's rivers, streams and lakes conceal an underwater world that few have seen. It's one of nature's best-kept secrets. Hidden beneath the surface are some little-known and bizarre animals. From swarms of microscopic creatures to exotic curiosities, and some of the largest freshwater giants on this planet. This is a journey unlike any other, from the snow-clad peaks of the Alps to the tidal waters of the North Sea, offering a rare glimpse into a colourful and mysterious underwater world. The journey begins in the Alps, Europe's highest mountain range. In the Berchtesgaden National Park, the sun's warming rays melt away the layers of snow to reveal the first signs of spring. Underneath a large glacier, meltwater slowly and silently carves away at the ice, forming a large underground cave. Drop by drop, the glacial dome releases its waters into the icy stream below, forming the Eisbach River. Every cubic meter of snow yields more than 2 bathtubs full of water. It's a huge reservoir of fresh water on the mountain slopes. Each spring, torrents of meltwater pour down the mountainsides, producing some of the highest waterfalls in Germany, including the Röthbach-Falls, with a drop of 470 meters. At the base of the fall, the water continues its journey underground, seeping into the porous limestone rocks. The Eisbach River shares a similar fate. It disappears into the ground just before reaching the Königssee. This deep fjord-like lake is renowned for its clear blue waters, which attract many visitors. The steep walls of the lake seem to continue endlessly downwards. The Königssee is one of Germany's deepest lakes. At the shallow end of the lake, the cold waters of the Eisbach River surface again. The crystal clear waters are poor in nutrients, creating a unique habitat. A shoal of small fish seek shelter among the sunken trees at the water's edge. They make an easy meal for predators. But the large northern pike is after much bigger prey. The ferocious water wolf is the most powerful predator in the lake, and even other hunters, such as perch, keep out of the way. With a length of up to 1.5 meters, the size of a 12-year-old boy, it dwarfs all others in the lake and has no natural enemies other than man. Small fish and invertebrates find shelter from predators amongst the water plants that grow in the shallow and sunlit parts of the lake. The pike is an ambush predator, which has a trick up its sleeve. Its colors and markings match the surroundings, so that it's well camouflaged. Some have yellow-golden stripes and spots, while others are a silvery blue. At the beginning of May, the pike gather in their favorite spawning sites, ready for the breeding season. The males arrive a few days before the females. She is the larger of the two, and he needs to keep up with her, staying close by her side. This mating ritual can last several days. The smaller male may well be wary of his large partner. Pike are known to resort to cannibalism when food is scarce, and will not shy away from eating their counterparts. But nature has found a solution to this problem. Females do not feed during the breeding season, ensuring that their partners and future offspring are safe. The social life of frogs and toads is a less precarious affair. They do not partake in cannibalism. The beginning of the breeding season is an excuse for one gigantic party. While intentions may be amorous, things can sometimes get out of hand. In the ensuing mating frenzy, a group of writhing males may risk drowning the object of their desire. After 2 or 3 days of frenetic activity, it's all over. A storm is brewing above the newly laid spawn. A heavy downpour quickly raises the water levels in the Königssee. Within a few hours, the streams are wild and unruly. Now there is only one way out of the lake, through the Königssee Weir. This man-made barrier helps control the flow of the river. Countless brooks and streams, fed by glacial water and rain, carve their way down the mountainsides. What starts as a trickle soon becomes a gushing cascade, gathering in force both above and below the ground. The power of the water shapes the landscape, wearing down rocks and entire mountains. The River Rhine is one such stream, born high up in the Alps. Now it winds its way towards the plains, until it empties its waters into Lake Constance, one of Germany's biggest lakes, depositing huge amounts of sediments carried down from the mountains. The cold, turbid water quickly sinks to the bottom. Millions of tons of sediment are poured into the lake each year. The milky curtain gives way to clearer waters and a dazzling array of underwater creatures. A stickleback guards its nest and fans the eggs to ensure they have a steady supply of oxygen. A pair of pumpkin seed fish, an invasive species from North America, are immersed in their courtship dance. In the deeper water of the lake, a hungry pike is on the prowl. Once it has identified a target, there is little chance of escape. The victim's partner is unlikely to fare much better. The dense underwater forests are home to a more secretive hunter. It mostly hides among the vegetation without moving and is rarely seen. A Wels catfish, Europe's largest freshwater predator and a true giant. If conditions are right, it can grow to over 3 meters in length and weigh 150 kilograms. It has strange whisker-like barbels around its gaping mouth with which it engulfs its prey. Fantastic myths long surrounded this elusive creature, which was believed to be able to swallow a man whole. In fact, the catfish prefers to hide in the dark depths of the lake. Lake Constance is over 250 meters deep, formed by glaciers during the Ice Age. The little light that penetrates beyond a depth of 30 meters is not sufficient to sustain plant growth. Creatures that live here need to be highly specialized. Zebra mussels were accidentally introduced in the 1960s and have rapidly multiplied. Today, huge carpets of mussels cover the rock face, filtering tiny particles of food from the water. They have become an important source of food for many diving ducks. The burbot is the only member of the cod family that lives in fresh water. It also lives in the cold darkness at the bottom of the lake. The lake floor is home to a community of highly specialized creatures. They scavenge on the dead remains of plants and animals that have sunk to the bottom. Freshwater crabs search the lake bed for carcasses. They are nature's recyclers, and together with tiny worms and bacteria, ensure that nothing is wasted. Lake Constance is also a massive ship graveyard. Numerous old wrecks, such as the paddle steamer Jura, lie in the dark, waiting for the sediments drifting down from above to bury them completely. Lake Constance has long been an important shipping route for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and most of the shoreline is well developed. Over 3.5 million people live along its shores. The large human population makes life increasingly difficult for the lake's wildlife. And each year, another 6 million tourists and countless day visitors descend on the area. The lake is struggling to survive under the onslaught. Lake Constance has long attracted human settlers to its shores, and the evidence can still be seen under the surface today. The first settlements date back to 4,000 years BC. These early pioneers built their houses on stilts in the water. The water offered them safety from enemies and wild animals. Today, these ancient dwellings are a World Heritage Site. The sunlit edges of the lake are rich in wildlife. The shallow waters are the perfect nursery grounds for small fish. It's easy pickings for the grey heron. The pumpkin seed fish are also raising their young in the warm water. The hard-working male has excavated a nest on the gravelly lake floor and is keeping a close watch over his brood. Any intruders that venture too closely are quickly seen off. It's July, and all around the edge of the lake, hundreds of tiny tadpoles have hatched in the warm shallows. In recent years, the water quality of the lake has been improved by reducing pollution. It's had a positive impact on the plant and animal life, and the clearer waters allow the tadpoles to develop earlier. The eggs of the pike are also about to hatch. The translucent globes are attached to the underwater vegetation. Inside, the young pike are developing. The hatchlings still get nourishment from their yolk sac for a few days, until they're big enough to hunt for food. The Rhine continues to flow underneath Lake Constance and emerges at the southwestern end to resume its journey as a river. Soon after, it turns into a spectacular cascade, forming the biggest waterfalls in Europe, the Rhine Falls of Schaffhausen. The course of the river now takes it through the mountain ranges of central Germany and the famous Black Forest. During the last ice age, the Black Forest mountains were buried beneath large glaciers. The many small lakes are remnants from this time. The Schluchsee was originally one such glacial lake. But in the 1930s, a dam was built to turn it into a huge water reservoir, the highest in Germany. Its dark yellow waters hold a little-known secret. The curious color comes from balls of peat sitting at the bottom of the lake. During the Second World War, the lake was covered in peat and dead wood to hide it from enemy planes looking to bomb the dam. The Allies never found the lake, and the peat is still here today, giving the water its dark brown tint. The murky water also hides other reminders of the past. The remnants of the old original dam. It's a lost world, now occupied by the real inhabitants of the lake. Others have erected a cross on the lake bed. And a little further, a sculpture of the Madonna. East of the Schluchsee is Germany's biggest canyon, 30 kilometers long, formed by the river Wutach. Wutach means furious water, and indeed the white water coursing through the valley has carved out the deep gorge in little more than 70,000 years. It has created its own microclimate with an extraordinary diversity of plants and animals. Amongst them, is a survivor from the Ice Age, the star gentian. More than 600 different kinds of butterfly live within the gorge, as well as countless dragonflies and other insects. Mayflies perform their exquisite mating dance. This annual spectacle is short-lived. Most of them will be dead by the end of the day. Below the surface, a trout is waiting to ambush its prey. A large school of minnows is just beyond reach. The clear water reveals a wealth of other small creatures scuttling between the rocks. The larvae of insects such as mayflies and caddisflies that start their life underwater. They make easy pickings for those who know where to find them. The dipper specializes in just such prey. The dipper uses its wings to swim underwater. The hungry chicks need constant feeding. Someone else is also looking for food. A fire salamander. It's searching the riverbank for small insects and slugs. Fire salamanders need small streams with cold, clean water to live in. The Wutach provides the perfect conditions. This female is about to give birth and needs to seek out water urgently. Unlike most amphibians which lay eggs, fire salamanders give birth to live young. The fully developed baby salamanders are released straight into the water. She will give birth to up to 30 babies at a time. As soon as they leave the safety of the womb, the young salamanders have to fend for themselves. Their mother's job is done. Not so for the mother dipper. She still needs to care for her young brood, even though the chicks have left the nest. Her job is to introduce them to their watery habitat and show them how to hunt for food. But the young chick is not convinced. It will take another few days before the youngsters are ready to brave the torrents. The young fire salamanders have no such privileges. They have to catch their own dinner. But it will take a little practice. His perseverance pays off. The water coursing through the Wutach Canyon has travelled from the high Alps and made its way through rock crevices, lakes and streams. But its journey is not just over land. Water can cover great distances in the air. Millions of tiny droplets gather into massive clouds and float across the sky. Eventually, they return to Earth as rain and continue their journey on land. Some droplets choose a more unusual route. They seep through the porous rocks, forming underground streams, as in the limestone hills in the Swabian Alps. Prehistoric fossils litter the riverbed. And eventually, the water is forced out again as a natural spring. The remarkable turquoise colour of the Blautopf, or blue cauldron, comes from the high concentration of limestone in the water. And beneath it is a vast network of caves, which has only recently been discovered. Modern diving equipment has enabled us to venture into this alien world. The entrance to the cave system lies 20 meters below the surface. A little further, and the divers find the bone of a human arm. It's one of the many mysteries of these strange caves. Diving here is tricky and dangerous, and much of the vast labyrinth is still unexplored. Only the most experienced divers are allowed down here, into this unknown world. The deeper they penetrate, the more they discover. Enormous caves the size of cathedrals, and the most spectacular natural sculptures. It's a majestic fairyland of stalactites and stalagmites, stone pillars and stone curtains. It's a challenge navigating a way through the rocky maze, and not without its hazards. One moment, they face the narrowest of rock crevices. The next, a descent into a deep sinkhole. So far, only 10 kilometers of the cave system has been explored, but it's thought to be several dozen kilometers long. Cave exploration is as much of an adventure as a science. Part of the aim is to map the underground terrain and get a better understanding of the geology. The hard work and persistence finally pays off. Chemical analyses may provide clues as to the source of the water and the route it has covered. At the northern rim of the Swabian Alps, the water flows directly from the river Neckar into the Rhine. The upper Rhine is more of a canal than a river, having been straightened in the 19th century. It was once up to 3 kilometers wide in parts, winding its way through the swampy floodplains. Until a few decades ago, the water was highly polluted. In recent years, this has changed, bringing back many of the fish that had long disappeared. Along the small side arms of the river, swampy forests that once covered the floodplain are still preserved today. It's Germany's Amazon, rich in wildlife. Crystal clear waters, a near Caribbean blue in color. And it's all down to the many underwater springs that feed clear, cold water into the streams. The result is a unique habitat with an unusual variety of plants and animals. A large freshwater turtle introduced from North America appears to feel at home here. The near-tropical conditions and warm sunshine are maybe not that different to the Everglades in Florida. It's an idyllic scene, completed by the display of yellow flowers of the bladderwort. But beneath the surface, the story is more sinister. The bladderwort is a carnivorous hunter. The small bladders are in fact deadly traps. Inside, there is a partial vacuum. The slightest touch to one of the trigger hairs, and the trapdoor flies open, sucking in passing prey. It all takes just a split second. The flooded forests are also home to a larger predator, the European otter. With its long, streamlined body, it's perfectly adapted to a life in water. The thick, waterproof fur keeps them dry and warm underwater, so they can play for hours on end. For centuries, otters were persecuted for their fur and disappeared from many parts of Germany. Today, they are protected, and populations are slowly recovering again. It's midsummer. The pike hatchlings are now big enough to hunt for prey. But small fish only need small meals. Fish spawn, water fleas, and small insects. They are still only 4 centimeters long, but already bold enough to tackle other fish. But this one has bitten off more than it can chew. Other small hunters are hiding in the vegetation. Tiny soft-bodied polyps called hydra stretch out their thin arms in search of prey. Their tentacles are lined with highly specialized stinging cells that will fire poisonous threads into their victim. A dense cloud of freshwater shrimp. They've invaded Western Europe from the Black Sea and are spreading rapidly through Germany. Divers have reported seeing colossal swarms of millions of animals. A jellyfish, another invasive species. Originally from Southeast Asia, it has successfully managed to spread around the world. It's the only freshwater jellyfish to be found in Europe. This exotic invader feeds mainly on water fleas and other small invertebrates. So far, it seems to be causing little damage to its new home. The turtles calmly watch the activities of the busy otters. Newcomers and old residents live peacefully side by side here. It would seem that not all new arrivals are harmful to the environment. Some simply make our natural world a little more colourful. It's autumn, and there's change in the air. The colourful autumn leaves float down to the surface before sinking to the bottom of the stream. It's an annual cycle of life and death that is played out both above and below water. Purple sulfur bacteria thrive in the stagnant water and decompose the dead leaves and vegetation. It's a surreal landscape, the purple globes floating within a virtual galaxy. Each autumn, the bacteria form shroud-like blooms. But by the coming spring, they've disappeared again. This underwater wall of fog is also formed by bacteria. It's a sign that winter is on its way. The eerie calls of the common crane echo through the valley as they gather to begin their long migration south. The otter's thick fur also protects it against the cold winter. All it needs at this time of year is some open water where it can hunt for fish. A thick layer of ice has formed, sealing off the shallow pools and lakes. The cold temperatures have driven most creatures into hiding. The fish seek out a sheltered spot near the bottom and sit out the winter in a torpor. They slow down their metabolism and breathing to save energy and wait for spring. Once temperatures rise again, the water, now locked in ice, will be freed once more and can continue its journey towards the sea. It's mid-February. Germany is in the icy grip of winter. The landscape is covered in a deep layer of snow. Only the fast-flowing streams continue their journey. The freezing temperatures have created glassy sculptures along the way. For weeks, the lakes have been locked away under a thick sheet of ice. Plants and animals lie dormant, waiting for the coming spring. Most fish, like the carp, seek out a warm spot near the bottom of the lake, where temperatures remain around 4 degrees above freezing. They reduce their metabolism to a minimum and literally sit out the winter. Germany's largest freshwater fish, the Wels catfish, is also sleeping it out on the lake bed. But not everyone's asleep. The northern pike hunts all year round. Nonetheless, it's hard to find prey in winter. Most smaller fish are in a torpor and hard to spot. The pike's hunting instinct is only triggered by movement. An unwitting crab scuttling on the lake floor immediately attracts attention. It's little more than a snack for the large predator, but it keeps the hunger at bay. This carp may have had a lucky escape, but the danger is not over yet. Other hunters are on the prowl above. The sea eagle can spot the silhouette of the fish through the ice. The carp has little choice but to move. Woken suddenly from his torpor, he is sluggish and disorientated. This time, the eagle was only after a dead fish, frozen within the ice. The Eifel region in western Germany is pockmarked with circular lakes. They were formed 20,000 years ago by volcanic explosions, when cold groundwater collided with hot lava. The resulting craters gradually filled with water. One of them is still above an active volcano today. It last erupted 13,000 years ago. The volcano continues to bubble away underground, releasing foul-smelling toxic gases into the water. Moisture-laden clouds race across the skies towards the Harz Mountains. The forested hills are the tallest mountain range in northern Germany and known for their fairy tale landscape. A muskrat is waiting for spring and the fresh growth of plants. The first warm days in March triggers a sudden burst of activity. Frogs awaken from hibernation with only one thing on their mind. The Harz region is endowed with a vast network of lakes and reservoirs, and over 500 kilometers of rivers and canals that were once built for the region's mining industry. It's one of the largest historical water management systems in the world and has been declared a World Heritage Site. The sun's warming rays finally melt away the last signs of winter. The rush of meltwater sets the wheels of the watermill in motion. In the past, wheels like this would have worked the old mining lifts, transporting people and animals underground. Today, the man-made waterways provide a welcome refuge for amphibians. Alpine newts. The male fans his tail to impress the female. It's the breeding season, and males have turned a dark blue colour, while the females are a drabber brown. The extensive network of man-made canals eventually gives way to natural streams and rivers. In spring, the meltwater turns these into rushing torrents. The powerful force of the water wears down the rocks and polishes them to smooth pebbles. Or perfectly formed round marbles. Living in fast-flowing streams requires special skills. For small fish, swimming against the strong current while searching for prey is no easy feat. Young rainbow trout seek out sheltered spots behind the rocks and wait for small creatures dislodged by the current to drift by. A casualty from above is also quickly snapped up. The tranquil waters of a lake provide less challenging conditions. A great crested newt, a larger relative of the Alpine newt. It's spotted a small water flea. Gotcha! The smallest inhabitants of the lake face the greatest hazards. Of the many thousands of tadpoles, only a few will survive to become adult frogs. This little fellow has come precariously close to the spillway of the lake. Having survived the dangerous drop, it now faces the gauntlet of many hungry mouths. At last, it reaches the safety of calmer waters. The new pond is home to underwater architects, caddisfly larvae, which build their protective cases from bits of dead vegetation. The predator at this waterhole is a ground beetle. It's attracted by the hundreds of tadpoles swarming at the water's edge. It's got its eye on one particularly juicy individual. The beetle sucks out its victim's body fluids, leaving behind the empty shell. The Harz region's numerous lakes and rivers still hold many secrets. The clear blue waters are rich in wildlife hidden from our eyes. They are teeming with life, a vibrant community of creatures that lead their lives below the surface. The European eel has travelled hundreds of kilometres to reach these waters. It started life out in the Atlantic, entering Europe's estuaries as a transparent glass eel. Swimming upstream against the current, the young elver finally reached these freshwater lakes. It will stay here until it becomes sexually mature in a few years' time, and then return to the sea to spawn and die. The pike, on the other hand, spends its entire life in these lakes. Young pike are already born with a strong hunting instinct. Even a small hatchling has no trouble catching his dinner. Although this one may have bitten off more than it can chew. The most mysterious creatures of all are the microscopic organisms of the lake. Strange alien life forms that resemble algal growths. In fact, they are tiny animals known as bryozoans. They filter nutrients from the water, taking advantage of the flow generated by colonies of mussels. The small coral-like creatures attach themselves to any hard substrate, forming a moss-like covering that has earned them their other name, moss animals. There are some 5,000 different kinds, and yet they remain largely unknown to most people. They live in colonies of thousands of individuals. Each one is little more than a millimeter in size, but together they filter the water like a gigantic purification system. In the lower Harz, the water makes its way through narrow valleys and gorges. It also disappears underground, seeping through the porous limestone rock. Carving out huge caverns, like the Hairman's Cave, it drips from the walls, creating spectacular calcium formations. Deep down, in the heart of the caves, is the lair of a dragon. The olm, or cave salamander, was once thought to be a dragon baby. It owes its strange appearance to living in permanent darkness. Having no use for eyes, it's completely blind and finds its way around with touch and smell. Unlike other salamanders, the olm breathes with gills that grow as red tufts from the side of the head. The animals in this cave were introduced from Croatia some 80 years ago. They are all males, so cannot breed. In these cold waters, they can go for years without feeding and live to be nearly 100 years old. Emerging out of the lower Harz, numerous streams pour their waters into one of Germany's biggest rivers, the Elbe. The young river winds its way through spectacular sandstone cliffs. Bizarre rock formations tower over one of Germany's most iconic and breathtaking landscapes. Just north of the Sandstone Mountains, the scenery changes dramatically. The extraction of coal has left deep scars in the landscape. A vast and barren wasteland greets the eye. Nothing was able to grow in this desolate moonscape, not even a blade of grass. When water was finally redirected to flood the abandoned quarries, life returned to the region once more. The murky waters still conceal the evidence of human destruction that once ravaged these valleys. Animals slowly recolonized the deserted pits. European pike were some of the first arrivals, their eggs transported on the backs of water birds. Local anglers and fishermen reintroduced carp and other fish into the waters. And it wasn't long before the lifeless desert was transformed into a rich and diverse underwater world. Ornamental koi, a domesticated form of the carp, have also found their way here. They happily interbreed with their grey cousins to produce a colourful mix of exotic-looking fish. Carp can grow to be over a metre long and weigh as much as a full-grown Labrador. They stir up the sediment, looking for small worms and insects. Returning abandoned mine pits to nature is an environmental success story. New water breathes new life into the wasteland. It's early spring, and the rivers break their banks, creating vast floodplains. The water causes chaos to human lives, but nature deals much better with it. Flood meadows in fact depend on the seasonal flooding. Dragonflies are busy laying their eggs. Each male guards his female by gripping her at the back of the neck. The ground beetle is on the prowl again. He's caught a female dragonfly off guard. A grass snake is also out hunting. It's a good swimmer and at home in the flooded meadows. The floodwater awakens a creature that has lain dormant for years. As the pools fill with water, a tiny fossil comes back to life. The triops, or tadpole shrimp. It has survived almost unchanged for 220 million years and is thought to be the oldest living animal species on Earth. The tadpole shrimp's eggs can remain dormant in the ground for decades, hatching only when the pool floods. The tiny crustacean leads a short and frenetic life, digging into the sediment in search of food particles. Most are females and don't need males to breed. They produce offspring by virgin birth from unfertilized eggs. Eventually, the flood water is channeled back into canals and rivers. North of the River Elbe, in the county of Mecklenburg, lies Germany's Lake District, the land of 1,000 lakes. It has over 2,000 lakes, rivers and streams. Peaceful coves and vast reed beds provide a safe refuge for a great variety of wildlife. A bittern hides among the thick reeds. Its young chicks are almost ready to leave the nest. The secretive bird is rarely seen, its mottled brown plumage helping it to blend in among the tall grass. Another wetland resident leaves more obvious signs of its presence. It cuts down trees and builds dams and lodges. The beaver was hunted to near extinction in Europe by the 20th century, but today its large lodges are becoming a frequent sight once more. Inside, the adults are raising their young family of up to 6 kits. The young beavers are already exploring their surroundings and learning which plants make a good meal. They spend most of their time playing and copying their parents. They still have a lot to learn and will gradually gain the courage to venture further afield into the vast underwater world at their doorstep. Mecklenburg's lakes are like no other, with an astonishing diversity of marine life. There are over 50 different species of fish, and amongst them, some rare and unusual kinds. The Atlantic sturgeon, an ancient and prehistoric-looking fish. Sturgeons have been around for almost 200 million years and swam with the dinosaurs. Sadly today, this extraordinary relic from the past is critically endangered. The biggest threat facing most fish today are not their natural predators, but man. Fishing lines, baskets and nets take more than their fair share of the water's bounties. Even powerful hunters like the pike often become the hunted. "39,000 tons of fish are taken from Germany's oceans and inland waters every year, around a quarter of those from freshwater lakes and rivers. In Mecklenburg, fishing is mostly carried out sustainably. The key to sustainable fishing is to avoid over-harvesting and depleting fish stocks irreversibly. Populations need to be able to recover for fish and fishing to survive into the future. Fishermen have long been an integral part of the Mecklenburg Lake District. And so has the osprey. The large raptor feeds almost exclusively on fish, but only takes what it needs to survive. Although it sometimes takes on more than it can handle, it never threatens to upset the balance of nature. Cormorants are also superb fishermen. In shallow waters with plentiful fish, the birds flourish and breed prolifically. After years of persecution, their populations are now recovering at a dramatic pace. To prevent the overfishing of Mecklenburg's lakes, local fishermen have to ensure that the waters are regularly restocked. Small fish farms guarantee a regular supply of juvenile fish. A more unusual breeding program is attempting to reintroduce the European crayfish to these waters. This native species was driven close to extinction by the crayfish plague, a deadly fungus brought over from North America by the signal crayfish. The hope is that these youngsters will help the European crayfish population recover in due time. The female carries the fertilized eggs on her legs for half the year until they hatch. The male has bigger claws and a special pair of forward-facing legs that are used for mating. The reintroduction program is proving successful. A number of Mecklenburg's rivers and lakes now have stable populations. As the sun sinks below the horizon, the lake comes alive with the night shift. The American signal crayfish hides during the day, much like its European cousin. Now it emerges to look for small food particles in the sediment. A rainbow trout is also looking for a meal. All this activity attracts the most powerful predator on the block, the pike. The pike has a voracious appetite and feeds incessantly. Not surprisingly, it hunts both during the day and at night. Any little movement catches its eye, so it pays to hide or make a quick escape. A muskrat swimming overhead is oblivious to the danger below. This time, it is lucky. South of Mecklenburg, the river Elbe slowly makes its way towards the North Sea. The name Elbe comes from the old German word for river. The flow of the water keeps the river's inhabitants on the move. The Chinese mitten crab finally seeks shelter under a large rock. Since 1990, the water quality of the Elbe has much improved, and fish populations are making a comeback. The Atlantic salmon was once common in Germany's rivers, but by the beginning of the 20th century, it had completely disappeared. Reintroduction efforts began here in the Elbe in 1995, and 3 years later, the first fully grown adults were seen. Now, numbers are on the increase. The aim is to boost the population until it can sustain itself without human help. Another endangered fish has had to wait much longer for a helping hand. The tiny hatchlings of the Atlantic sturgeon. They're being raised in the laboratory of a fish farm. Sturgeon meat and eggs sold as caviar are a lucrative business. Fish farms such as this one not only reduce the pressure on wild sturgeon, but also help with the reintroduction program. Some of the young hatchlings bred here are destined to be released in Germany's rivers. The tiny eggs, or black gold, are the reason why the sturgeon is critically endangered. Here, the eggs are artificially inseminated with sperm. Each step of the breeding process and caviar production is carefully controlled and monitored. A few days after fertilization, the young fish larvae hatch. The hatchlings are miniature versions of the adults. They'll need to be around 25 centimeters in length before they're ready to be released into the wild. The young sturgeons will be set free in carefully selected, suitable rivers. But the small fish are not used to the strong pull of the current. And some still need a little bit of a helping hand. Small tags on the dorsal fins will help researchers to identify and monitor individual animals. It's the beginning of a new life for the young sturgeon. A life full of new challenges and dangers. Not all of them will make it to adulthood. Specially designed fishways have been created to help them to pass safely through dams and weirs. Europe's biggest fishway is on the banks of the Elbe at Get.factual. It's large enough to allow the migrating sturgeon to pass through and make their way to the North Sea. But before they reach the open ocean, the fish face one last hurdle. Hamburg City, Germany's busiest port. Here the waters are dark and turbid, heavy with sediments and industrial waste. It's a bleak and desolate environment for wildlife. It's hard to believe that any fish could survive in these murky waters. But the sturgeon have little trouble making their way through this underwater wasteland. There are over 20 species of sturgeon worldwide, and most are bottom feeders. While some spend their entire lives in fresh water, a few embark on a migration to the open ocean. All sturgeon have sensitive barbels hanging from their chins, which they drag along the riverbed, feeling their way around. Eyes are of little use in dark, muddy water, so they use touch and smell to find their prey. Being slow-growing and very late to become mature, sturgeon are particularly vulnerable to overfishing, and most species are currently endangered. Escorted by gigantic ocean liners, the river now enters the North Sea. The North Sea coast, with its vast mudflats and salt marshes, is one of the richest ecosystems on Earth, and much of it a national park. As the tide retreats and exposes the huge expanse of bare mud, a community of specialist creatures is revealed. The animals that live here are adapted to extreme changes in water levels and salinity. The sand piles emerging from the soft mud are made by tiny burrowing worms. They provide plentiful food for birds like oyster catchers. To eat and be eaten. One moment a predator, the next prey. From the tidal estuary, the sturgeon finally reach the open ocean. Their journey takes them past a geological oddity, Heligoland, Germany's most distant island. It's famous for its red sandstone cliffs that descend steeply into the water. The waters here are spectacularly rich in marine life. Another well-kept secret of Germany's underwater world.